Hi there, Duke fans. It is Tuesday afternoon, and it is time for DBR podcast episode number 461, the Duke basketball report, coming to you from Atlanta and from the West Coast today. I'm Jason Evans. I'll be hosting from my home base here in the South. Joining me is Sam Klein. Sam, where are you?
I am in Southern California for the holiday. And just before we started recording, Jason said, Sam, you're not going to make any mistakes that I need to edit out on this program. And then, Jason, you flubbed your intro to this thing.
Yeah, that's how it works. That's how it goes sometimes. But we're going to plow through, even with my verbal mistakes. Guys, guys, Sam, obviously Donald Wine is not with us today. Donald remains at the World Cup over in Qatar, having a great time, I'm sure. And I hope we'll hear from him very soon, but he didn't need to check in for what we have today. We're going to be recapping Duke's victory over Bellarmine just last night. Both a workmanlike and a impressive victory, I thought, for the Blue Devils. And we'll be looking ahead, the PK 85 out there in Portland. It's coming up, the Nike tournament that Duke is in. We'll be playing on Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. We will preview the games that Duke will have on Thursday and Friday. We won't go so far as to preview what's happening on Sunday when Duke might face Gonzaga, depending on how the brackets work out. But we'll look ahead to what Duke has in the first two rounds of that very prestigious, very important tournament. But Sam, we begin with the Blue Devils taking on Bellarmine last night. The final score was Duke 74, Bellarmine 57. And we have to do headlines first. So, Sam, give me your headline, and what's your major takeaway?
We got a few good ones from the listeners, specifically those that reference the fact that Bellarmine are the Knights, and I went with a pun around that. So I said Knights valiant in defeat against Duke. I thought, and we're going to talk about this, I think, at length, Jason, but Bellarmine acquitted themselves really well in this game, despite sort of Duke holding them at arm's length for the last 30 minutes of the contest.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we got a ton. I mean, an unbelievable number of people who wrote into the inbox at dbrpodcast@gmail.com to send us their headlines from this game. Wow. It was stunning. I woke up this morning, I was like, oh my God, my inbox is just full of people who have sent me headlines. And like you noted, we can't read them all. It would take way too much time. But the ones that I like, the ones that we're going to highlight, both play off that notion that the Bellarmine nickname is the Knights, Knights. Jim Harris sent us a good one. He said night for the Knights. And Jason Wilkinson was on the same kind of theme. He said Devil's Night, but he spelled night with a K. So both of those I thought were decent headlines to highlight. And again, people send us your best suggestions, your best ideas for a headline from each one of the games. My headline from the game: disciplined Duke uses D to bash Bellarmine, because I think the biggest thing that Duke did in this game was play good defense. But before I get to what I think, Sam, I'll go to you first. Give me your major takeaway on this contest.
I had one more headline I needed to highlight because listener Lee Maxon sent us to the Knights. Duke says knee, and he spelled it wrong. So Jason thought that it was a reference. He spelled it as nicht, like it was the
Which
German.
is German. That's German for no. I thought, yeah.
But what he was actually referencing was Monty Python.
Was Monty Python. Okay, well, if it said N-I, I would have said it was Knights who said knee. But he said say nicked, and I was like, what is
anyway, we all make mistakes. It's totally fine. But Jason, you wanted my takeaway from this game. I guess I just want to do this from Duke's perspective, because I did want to talk. I wanted to praise Bellarmine and the way that they attacked the Blue Devils and how they didn't let this game get out of hand for them. So just very quickly on that, the way that Bellarmine was able to use their sort of creative offensive playmaking to keep Duke honest, especially in the first half, I thought was really impressive. That being said, Duke figured out pretty quickly that the way to overwhelm Bellarmine was taking three-pointers and using their size. And I know you're going to talk a lot about the rebounding effort that Duke put on yesterday. Bellarmine was able to pull down almost no offensive rebounds. Duke was really locking them up on the defensive glass, and then was again tough at Duke's offensive end, pulling down rebounds. So I was impressed with all of that execution for Duke. We also talked about how this game could be slow. Totally fine for Duke to play at that pace. It sort of a double-edged sword for Bellarmine, where, and I know that they talked about this in the post game, but when Bellarmine gets down 15, it's sort of hard to come back. We're going to talk when we get ahead to the preview of the Phil Knight Legacy Tournament that Duke is playing in this week, how there are some fast-paced teams that Duke might face on Friday between Florida and Xavier. And so it'll be an interesting contrast in styles. I feel like in the early part of this season, I think Duke is more comfortable playing slow, like playing at Bellarmine's pace, and is fine playing at a fast pace, but it's sort of something we need to see the team develop.
Yeah, I don't know about that because John Shire has talked about he wants this team to play fast, and they certainly, when they get the ball on offense, they try to push it. There were a number of times in this game where Duke raced the ball up court because they were trying to get Bellarmine to play a little bit quicker. But I agree with you. They look like they're comfortable playing whatever style you want, especially on the defensive end of the floor. And I wanted to start with that. I just thought we did a great job of not getting hypnotized by the ball movement by Bellarmine. We didn't fall for their numerous shot fakes. I think because our guys knew that our athleticism and our advantages in height and speed would allow us to, maybe react a heartbeat later than usual and still be able to contest a shot. Mark Mitchell in the postgame had an interesting quote. He said, they don't stop moving at all. He said it was really hard for us to provide help defense because you had to still know where your man was. And he said it was just a really good challenge for us. He's right. The fact that Bellarmine is constantly moving and shifting around, if you take your eye off your man for a second to provide help, your guy's going to backdoor you and you're going to get beat. And I thought the fact that Duke didn't have that happen to them was a real sign of maturity from a very, very young team. These guys have picked up the defense super fast. And then the other thing I want to mention about that really quickly, Sam, I just wanted to say, sort of like you did, I was just so impressed with how Bellarmine was able to run the shot clock really late, all the way down to 0, and still get off a fairly decent shot. I mean, they made us play defense for 35 seconds, and it's great for this team that they succeed, that for Duke, that we succeeded at playing defense for 35 seconds.
There's an interesting contrast also in the fact that Bellarmine basically plays 5 guys 30 minutes. And they have just looking at their minutes from last night, and it felt like they were, by the way, like trying to keep the thing competitive the whole way through. So I think these minutes should be fairly representative. They only had 6 guys play more than 10 minutes last night, and the other 3 guys only got in sort of towards the end. Whereas Duke has been playing a lot of guys regular minutes. Yesterday, Dariq Whitehead just squeaked by with 10 minutes, and therefore Duke had 9 players on the floor, the 9 that we've really seen so far this year. No Jaden Shoot, but everybody else got minutes, and everyone played 10 minutes last night. So Duke is constantly switching guys in and out of the lineup. We speculated a lot early in the season about what the eventual minutes breakdown is going to be, and I don't think we're there yet, right? If Dariq White is still only playing 10 minutes, we're not at sort of full strength expected version of Duke. But we'll talk, I think, when we talk about individual player performances, maybe we start with Kyle Filipowski. He only plays 21 minutes in this game, in a game where Duke was, I think, trying to figure more things out. They get a little bit more practice time, quote unquote, before they head to Portland. Filipowski has been the best player on the team this season. KenPom says that he's one of the 5 or 6 best players in the country so far this year, and he only plays 21 minutes against Bellarmine.
Yeah. Hey, before we get to the other players, there are a couple other, macro team things I would like to talk about. Wrapping up the defensive conversation on the season, Sam, Duke is currently giving up 53.2 points per game. Now, I know we've played mostly overmatched opponents, Kansas really being the only team we played that expects to be in the NCAA tournament, but still 53 points per game is really impressive. No one can score on us. We've given up 266 points on the season through our first 5 games. That's the least number of points through 5 games of any Duke team since 1948-49. I can't even name anyone on the 1948-49 team.
I would say it's a year that would live in infamy, but I have
Yes.
no idea what to remember from that year.
Well, the Duke Sports Information Department tells me that's the last time Duke gave up as little as 266 points in their first 5 games. We also, I want to note something. We continue to be a team that does not put our opponent on the free throw line. We do not give up easy baskets. Bellarmine only shot 6 free throws in this game, and that's not an aberration on the season. Duke is now third in the country, number 3 of all the teams in Division I basketball at our opponent's free throw rate, at the number of times we put our opponent on the line. That's really, really impressive. Okay, let me get to the other macro things I wanted to, big picture things I wanted to mention. Ball movement. It was yet another game where we saw the entire team looking for the extra pass, looking for the second pass, not looking for the most obvious guy to be open, but looking for a guy who is maybe one more player beyond or making one extra pass. And it's just incredibly advanced considering these guys are freshmen and they haven't played together very much. We had 18 assists in this game on 25 made baskets, an assist rate of 72%. And as we've been seeing all year long, there are a lot of different guys doing this. It's not just one guy or one or two guys getting the assists. We had 6 different players get multiple assists in this game. Jeremy Roach led the team with 5. Got to talk about the rebounding really quick. Duke has now out-rebounded our opposition by double digits in all 5 games this year. I'm going to repeat that because that's so stunning. Every single team we have played this year, all 5 of them, we've out-rebounded them by double digits. The last time Duke had 5 games in a row with double-digit rebounding margin was 1998-99. I can name players on that team. That 99,
a few of them.
Yeah. I know that team by heart. That 99 team, one of my favorite Duke teams of all time, maybe one of the best Duke teams, the best Duke team to never win a title, I think.
Jason, on that rebounding note, I am among the things that I am curious to see when Duke goes to Portland, and then they come home and play Ohio State in another very tough game right after that in the big ACC Big Ten Challenge. I'm curious to see how all of these statistical, you might even call them anomalies, maintain, right? If Duke has to play Gonzaga on Sunday, I hope Duke gets to play Gonzaga on Sunday. For I want to see Duke playing more good teams, and playing Gonzaga likely means that Duke is in the finals of that Phil Knight Legacy tournament. But one of the things I'm looking forward to is Duke going up against Gonzaga's front line that features Drew Timme. Any opportunity that Duke gets to play teams like that, I'm excited for. And by the way, Florida and Xavier, the teams we're going to preview later, also come with a fair bit of size. So these are challenges that Duke is going to have to step up for this week.
Yeah. By the way, my hot take is in the PK 85, Drew Timme is not the best big man in that tournament. I'll tell you who is in a little bit. How's that for a deep tease for you?
Is it possibly someone we're going to play on Friday?
Yes, in all likelihood.
I think so.
Possibly. Depends on if they win their game, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Duke and that team have to win their games.
Right, exactly. Or lose that game, which would suck. But anyway, on the rebounding, you were talking about, are these things aberrations or are they real? One thing I want to see is Tyrese Proctor really this great a rebounder? I mean, remember he had 10 last game. He had 10 rebounds last game, and I was sort of like, oh, he's just grabbing, defensive boards. It's not. He then has 8 in this game. That's 18 in the past 2 games. Tyrese Proctor, he also had 2 blocked shots.
A game that was slow, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one thing for there to be a lot of chaos in a game and a guard happens to get 8 or 10 rebounds, like you said, because he just sort of happened to be standing in the mid-range area. But in a game that's slow, for a guard to get those rebounds, he's looking for them.
All right, so can we get to players now? I want to get to a couple players. You already mentioned Filipowski, another great game. He's now led Duke in scoring in 4 out of 5 games this year. As you mentioned, he's among the top 5 players in the land in Ken Pomeroy's rating of the best player in the country. That's unreal, unbelievable that he's doing this so far. But the 2 guys I want to highlight from this game are 2 guys that came off the bench, Jalen Blakes and Jacob Grandison, who they keyed Duke's early run. Like it was a close game. I mean, it's just a few minutes in, but they came in and really turned up the energy for Duke and gave us a lead that we would never relinquish. Jim Sumner, friend of the podcast, Jim Sumner, who has a great newsletter that everyone needs to sign up for, said in his newsletter, he quoted John Shire as saying that Jalen and Jacob Grandison just bring a certain amount of energy. They play the game the right way, and they're all about winning. What a great quote from your coach about you. I mean, like if your coach says you're all about winning, it's a pretty nice thing for him to say. Blake's led the team. Jalen Blake's led this team in plus minus. He was plus 15 in just 19 minutes of play. That's impressive. That's a big number. He continues to attack on offense, and he is so bothersome on defense. And then Grandison, I'm yet to see that guy take a bad shot. He took 7 threes. Every single one of his threes was the right shot to take in that moment.
And 4 of them went in, right? And we talked early in the season about how Jacob Grandison's 3-point shooting is going to be a deep pocket secret weapon type of thing for Duke. Not that teams won't know that it's coming, but as scared as you can get about facing Filipowski and Lively, Proctor, Whitehead, these guys, Grandison's going to come off the bench and hit threes. And hopefully Jalen Blakes continues to come off the bench and bring all of that intensity that I think I was highest on in the preseason, but I sort of wasn't sure, like, is he going to be like high energy defense guy that plays 6 minutes a game, or is he going to play 15 minutes a game? And it feels like we're headed for the 15 minutes a game, and with a lot of, steady rotation in and out of who's doing the ball handling, who's picking up the toughest defensive assignments. Some of that feels like it's going to be a size-based thing, as opposed to, Blake's is definitely the best defender, or Proctor is the best defender, or Whitehead eventually, when he gets healthy, is the best defender. This is all stuff that still feels very fluid, and I am excited about that. It does feel like John Shire is committed to a deeper bench than Coach K was, at least in any recent memory.
Yeah, and speaking of Blake's, last word on him, I was the guy who was the most skeptical of him playing any crunch time minutes. And Duke hasn't had a game other than the Kansas game where there has been a crunch time where you've been able to see who might be in the rotation. And I still don't think Jalen Blakes is going to be someone who features a lot in crunch time. But man, I won't be shocked if he does find some time there, because there are things he brings to the table in energy and in defense, especially, that help this team in a big way, in a way that I did not see in the preseason. I just didn't think that was going to happen.
And by the way, on offense, he has looked a lot stronger, both in like stepping into good shots. He had a couple of 3-pointers last night, and attacking the basket. I'll get ahead of myself and tell you that my play of the game was Jalen Blakes' layup, where he's sort of falling over. And this was early in the game when things were, I guess, a little bit more in doubt. Bellarmine and Duke sort of went back and forth for the first 6, 7, 8 minutes. And Blakes' layup was one of those moments that was like, okay, we got this.
By the way, Jalen Blakes is hitting 50% of his 3-pointers in the season. Did you know that?
That's awesome. I love that. I had not picked up on that yet. Let's see it. Let's see that continue.
And Mark Mitchell's also hitting 50% of his threes. If I had told you in the preseason that Jalen Blakes and Mark Mitchell would hit half their 3-pointers in the year, you would think I was insane, but that's what we've got so far.
We're also 5 games into this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And only one of them has been a contest that anyone expected to be close. So
right.
Again, I'm going to say this a million times. Call me again, after Duke finishes the run in Portland plus the Ohio State game.
Right, exactly. We're in the small sample size region of 3-point shooting, I think. All right, so before we get to the bad, Sam, I had one thing that I was like, it's both good and bad, so I'm going to drop it in here. 3-pointers. I told you in the preview that Bellarmine gives up a lot of 3-pointers. I feel like around the middle of the second half, Duke fell in love with a 3-pointer too much. We were taking too many of them. They were allowing us to take it, and it may not have been the best choice every time down the floor. And I didn't go back and look, but I think we may have had a run of about 6 or 7 3-pointers in a row at one point. You got to have a little more balance than that. But even though I'm going to tell you that, I think we shot them a little too frequently, we did hit 40% from 3. We made 14 3-pointers. So 42 of the 74 points that Duke scored in this game, more than half the points we scored, came from 3-pointers. So that's a big percentage of our offense. The one thing about the 3-pointer that I didn't like, again, I think with us taking them too quickly and us mostly having guys standing on the perimeter, our offensive rebounding was not this game what it usually has been this year. And I think part of that was because we were, taking these threes and not getting guys inside at all. We only offensive rebounded 37% of our missed shots, which is a good number for most teams, but not what Duke's been up close to 50% this season, and Bellarmine is a small team. And I, like I said, this is both good and bad on the 3-pointers. I feel like taking as many threes as we did, taking them as quickly as we did at times, may have allowed Bellarmine to hide the fact that Duke was going to dominate them on the boards even more.
And maybe the fact that Tyrese Proctor was the one clanging all the 3-pointers means that he wasn't in position to be doing all the offensive rebounding, because apparently he's more of a rebounder than a shooter.
I love it. All right, Sam, what's the bad? We got to have a little bit of bad, right?
I think it is Proctor. Sort of, he has another weird game on offense, and I don't know. As excited as I am that Blakes does some of the ball handling, Roach does some of the ball handling, Proctor does some of the ball handling, I do want to see a little bit more consistency in Duke's offensive attack. It's great that lots of guys can bring the ball up the floor, but there were a few times last night where it sort of doesn't matter who was running the ball up, but the ball's coming up the floor, and it's not clear that the guys are spacing themselves into appropriate lanes. You might see them overcrowding one side of the floor and leaving the rest of the floor open, and there's just a lot of adjustment that's going on. I feel like some of that is Proctor, but it also feels like a team problem. Maybe this is something that is going to get worked out with additional practice and additional film time, of which they won't have probably enough over the next week, given how many hard games they have coming up, and the fact that there's a trip all the way to the West Coast. I imagine, given that like they'll fly out they're flying out to Portland today. I think we saw on social media they'll fly all the way back from the West Coast on Sunday night into Monday. They have another game on Wednesday. So I don't know how much film time they're going to have to fix all of this spacing trouble, but some of that is what's happening on offense, and I don't know. I can't tell the extent to which that is affecting the quality of some of the shots that they're taking, but it might be.
Yeah, I think you're potentially right. And Tyrese Proctor, he feels like a guy, I think we forget that he's supposed to still be in high school.
And that he only showed up,
Yeah.
not that he only showed up a few months ago, because now it's been some time, but that he did show up after everyone else did this summer. So to the extent that there's like some integration issues that are still going on with him, that might be present, and it might take a few more weeks for him to get comfortable, not being at Duke and being with the team, but actually like executing the plays with these teammates.
So my bad was not Tyrese Proctor. If I have to pick a player, it's Dariq Whitehead. And I want to be clear, I'm not blaming him for being bad. He is clearly still working off a lot of rust, and it sort of sounds like, the rumors, the hints that we're getting, the things that they're saying in press conferences and the such. It seems like Duke doesn't really expect him. They don't expect Whitehead to be back at who he really will be for a few more weeks. Maybe not even until we get a little bit closer to Christmas. He only played 10 minutes in this game. That's going to change. There's no question that this guy is going to play 25, 30 minutes at least, by the time we hit Christmas time or so. And I think that this game probably was one where his rust was more of a concern for Shire than it might be in some other games. And that's because of the way Bellarmine plays offense. And Whitehead may not be ready yet to play the kind of communicating defense, the kind of switching. Duke was switching 1 through 5, by the way, in this game. Anytime Bellarmine set a screen, anytime Bellarmine did one of those handoffs, Duke switched rather than letting, a Bellarmine guy, get a run into the lane where they can cause more trouble. And I think that Whitehead may not have been ready for that level of defense. Also, his shot is just clearly not there yet. And then the other thing I wanted to mention the badges very quickly. We talked about the fact that Bellarmine loves to backdoor you, and they got some backdoors on us. But the thing that surprised me was it seemed like they got them on Jeremy Roach, most experienced player on the floor. And it seemed to me like the guy who seemed to get burned more than anyone else on the back door was Jeremy Roach. I think I counted 3 times in the first half alone where they were able to get Jeremy Roach turned the wrong direction and get a layup out of it. I also want to note, I don't know if it's good or bad, but congrats to Bellarmine for making some shots that they had no business making. There were a couple of times they put up shots. I was just like, how'd you do that? And it went in the bucket. So, and even doing that, they couldn't get to 60 points on Duke. All right, Sam, what's our play of the game? You already teed it up a little bit, right?
I said that the Jalen Blake's, I don't know if you want to call it a layup, the falling driving jumper thing where he's like sideways by the time he gets the ball up, but clearly is still in control. That's my play of the game.
Yeah, I looked back on the game, and I usually take notes of when I see a play that I'm like, oh, that's a potential play of the game. I didn't really have any. Like there was, Lively had another one of those pass out of the post into the corner for a 3-pointer. I want to say it was Granderson that hit the 3-pointer, but it was, and I feel a little bit guilty about making that my play of the game again, because that was my play of the game last game. But it was, again, an incredible pass from Lively. He was double teamed on the play. In fact, when we passed it to him, I was like, whoa, what is he going to do with the ball? And he whipped it so quickly. So that's half of my play of the game. The other half of my play of the game is another Lively play at the other end of the floor. There was a possession where Bellarmine got the ball in the post on Lively, and the guy that he was guarding probably put up 4 fakes that would have sent anyone else jumping into the rafters. And Lively held his ground, stayed still, and waited and waited and waited. And when the guy finally put up his shot, Lively blocked it. It's not something that you're going to go back and go, I remember that, wow, that's an incredible. But to me, I was like, that is the epitome of playing smart defense and using your length and height advantage to take advantage of the other team. So Derek Lively, for the pass and for the block shot, gets my play of the game.
And as much as you mentioned Jason Whitehead still coming back from injury, it feels like Lively is very quietly easing into the role that he is going to play when he's at full strength for Duke this year. Not the biggest scorer on the team, but a facilitator in a lot of different ways, both passing and on defense.
Yeah, by the way, folks, if you there are people out there who feel like Lively isn't doing a lot for this team because they're only focused on offense. You need to just watch him a bit on defense. He's something special, and Duke's gonna be playing some bigger teams coming up. We're about to preview that, and Lively is going to be essential to the defense.
One guy I don't think we talked about enough earlier on this game, and someone who I think we were tough on early in the season, or have been tough on so far, is Jeremy Roach. Not jumping off the page in terms of statistical performance, but 10 points yesterday with 5 assists, plays much more his own game in this one. And I don't think Duke needs Jeremy Roach to be a big time scorer for this team. I don't even think, based on all the length and athleticism that Duke has on the perimeter, that Duke needs Jeremy Roach to be the best perimeter defender. Although there will be nights where he is, just because of his savvy and his experience. But Jeremy Roach plays a really solid game yesterday for Duke, and I hope that we see that kind of steady play from him continue.
All right, time for us to take a break. When we come back, we look ahead to the Feast Week holiday tournament that the Blue Devils have, and the best player you've never heard of in college basketball. All right, we're back from the break, and it's time to look ahead to the PK 85. This is it's a 16-team tournament being held out at Nike headquarters out there in on the West Coast. But they've got it divided into 2 8-team brackets. And in Duke's bracket, their first game will be against Oregon State. And Sam, before I come to you at all, I'm just going to tell you very quickly that Oregon State might be the worst Power 5 team in the country. They are giving Louisville and Cal a run for their money for the title of the worst Power 5 team in all of college basketball. In their most recent game, Oregon State lost to Portland State by 13 points. And Ken Pomeroy says Portland State is the 261st best team in the land. Woo! This is not a good team. Sam, what do you have to tell me about Oregon State?
Well, I was going to say on the Portland State game, that's basically like the prelims to the Phil Knight Legacy tournament, because both of those teams are playing in the Duke and Gonzaga version of the tournament, not the UNC version of the tournament that's going on at the same time. So on Oregon State, I think you covered the basics here, which is that of all the Power 5 schools that Duke is going to face this season, this should be one of the easier games, after we adjust for the fact that Duke has to travel all the way to Portland and Oregon State has to get on the bus to get to Portland. Other than that, Duke should have the advantage everywhere. Oregon State, by the way, last year went 3-28, and I'm unsure as to
Dude,
why.
wait, repeat that number again. Wow.
So they went 3-28.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure why Wayne Tinkle is still working there. Wayne Tinkle was the coach at Montana for a long time. Duke fans may remember that Duke played Montana when Wayne Tinkle was the head coach there. I believe it was when I was in school, and the Crazies did a. I thought it was not a particularly clever cheer for Wayne Tinkle, but he's now the coach at Oregon State. He's had a couple of good years there. He made the Elite Eight 2 years ago in one of the
I mean,
most like,
that's why he's still there. I mean, there's some goodwill there.
but that was like one of the most miraculous, unexpected, dumb luck things to happen to a program that any. I mean, and that's not St. Peter's making the Elite Eight. This was like a not so good Oregon State team. They squeaked into the tournament, and I think they had won the Pac-12 tournament, right? They
Yeah.
shouldn't have even made the NCAA tournament, so they went on this run at the end of the season. Last year they go again. It's 3-28 and Tinkle doesn't get fired. So I'm not sure what he has on the administration there, but he's still there. There are a few guys on this Oregon State team that are at least sort of, I'd say, moderately interesting. The one that I wanted to highlight was Dexter Akano. He's a guard that kind of does everything for Oregon State. He's averaging 10 points, 3 boards, and 3 assists for them. And if it's of interest, he played prior to being at Oregon State, he was at Marquette and played for Steve Wojciechowski during Wojo's last year there before he was fired from Marquette. So if anyone has a little bit of intel on the way that Duke is running things, Dexter Akano has some tertiary, I'd say, Duke connections there.
All right, so I'll give you a few advanced stats on Oregon State very quickly. Ken Pomeroy says they're the 238th best team in the country. That's not good. They are a team that plays slow. They have the 274th slowest pace in the land. They play equally slow on offense and defense. They are finally a tall team. Duke has mostly been playing small teams. Duke finally gets to play a tall team. Ken Pomeroy says that Oregon State is the 17th tallest team in all of D1. And that's not because they have a bunch of 7-footers. They've got one guy who's 7 feet. He's he comes off the bench. He doesn't play a ton, but the rest of the team is a lot of guys who are like between 6'6" and 6'9". That's actually fairly similar to Duke, but for Duke, this is going to be an adjustment playing against guys who are the same size. We have mostly been playing teams where the guys are much smaller than us.
They've got a lot of Mark Mitchell sized guys running around in Oregon State.
Yeah.
Not a lot of Kyle Filipowski's, but
right.
A lot of Mark Mitchell's.
Right. On offense, this Oregon State team is terrible. I mean, terrible about turnovers. Almost 25%, almost a quarter of their possessions end in a turnover. That's horrible. They're a bad 3-point shooting team. They only hit about 25% from 3 so far this year. I know it's early in the season. I know we're talking small sample size. 25%, not good. They're at least smart enough to not shoot a lot of 3-pointers, but they don't hit them when they do shoot them. They do a good job of drawing fouls and getting to the free throw line, which, as I mentioned earlier, is something Duke is absolutely elite at, not allowing teams to the free throw line. So that'll be an interesting test for Oregon State. And they do a decent job, a pretty good job of hitting 2-point shots. I said they don't shoot a lot of threes. They shoot a lot of twos, and they tend to hit their twos pretty well, hit better than 50% from 2-point field goal land. On defense, they are a good shot blocking team, and they don't let teams hit a lot of 2-pointers as a result, but they're just an average rebounding team. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned already one of the guards, but their point guard and 2 wings, those 3 guys play like 30 plus minutes. Those guys are going to be in the game the entire time. They do some rotation on the front line, but their backcourt, they know who they want. They know what they've got. And those guys are going to play the whole game, which could be a problem because Duke does a lot more rotating. And if Duke is able to speed the game up a little bit, that could be trouble for Oregon State.
The thing that I want to emphasize, though, on that, Jason, is that while those guards are regular players who aren't coming out of the game for OSU, none of them would be starters at Duke.
Oh God, no.
They've got a freshman point guard, Jordan Pope, who's having a pretty good season, especially for a freshman. He was a 3-star recruit. He was like a Jordan Goldwire level recruit coming in, and he's one of the key starters for them. So I really hope that Duke doesn't make this an interesting game. Not only because, it would be bad that Duke is playing competitively against a team that's ranked in the 200s, but also that they then have two more difficult games the rest of the weekend.
Right. And let's get to previewing the next of those, because win or lose, assuming we beat Oregon State, we will play the winner of the game between Florida and Xavier. If we lose, we'll play the loser of the game between Florida and Xavier. And to be honest, Florida and Xavier, basically the same team, at least in terms of like their Ken Pom ranking. Let me go ahead and give you a little bit of my advanced stats. Well, let's take Xavier first, Sam, and then we'll do Florida. For Xavier, they are the number 33 team in Ken Pomeroy's rankings. He says they have a top 20 offense, so this is a really good offensive team. They've so far had 3 relatively uneventful games that they won, and then they played Indiana, a very good. Indiana's really good, and they only lost that game by 2 points. That shows you that Xavier is for real. They're a team that does not shoot a lot of 3-pointers, but when they do, wow, they really hit it. They're hitting 44% from 3. That's a huge number. Their center, Jack Nudge, does not mind ranging out to 3 and shooting 3-pointers. Derek Lively, Kyle Filipowski, Ryan Young, who's ever guarding Jack Nudge, is going to need to be aware that he is willing to go outside and shoot 3-pointers. And get this, he's hitting better than 50% from 3-point range on the season. Like Duke, Xavier is an elite rebounding team. They are 16th in the country at offensive rebounds. And they have this one really bizarre stat about them on their turnovers. They give up a ton of steals. Like, they're one of the 10 worst teams in the country at giving up steals. Like, they will give you the ball, but they don't give it up in other ways. There's this stat called non-steal turnovers. We've talked about this before on the podcast, which is stuff like, do you travel with the ball? Do you throw it out of bounds? Do you commit an offensive foul? Non-steal turnovers. Oregon State is the 11th best team in the land at non-steal turnovers. So they're one of the 10 worst teams at steals, at giving up steals, but they're one of the 11 best teams at not giving it up in other ways. It's sort of this weird, quirky thing about the way they run their offense.
And Jason, to talk a little bit more about the individual players in relation to this, a lot of Xavier's best players are big, experienced guys. So big guys tend to have a hard time holding on to the ball. That's just a fact of being a big man.
Yep.
But looking up and down there, if you look at sort of who's getting the most minutes for them, it's seniors and juniors and seniors and juniors. It's all experienced guys. A lot of guys playing in their 5th years. So, but some of the top players are guys like Jack Nungy and Zach Freemantle, who are big men. And so if you can't take the ball out of their hands, perhaps it's because they're playing slower. Although I don't think that's the case for Xavier, because they do play at a fairly fast tempo. But if you can't get the ball out of their hands, they are smart with it. So this is a team that's really well coached. They're led by Sean Miller, who, whatever you think about the way that he has run programs in the past, he is undeniably a smart coach. He knows how to get teams ready, and I imagine is walking around with a bit of a chip on his shoulder these days.
Yeah, for sure. All right, should we get to Florida?
Jason, before we move to talking about Florida, I did want to highlight one player for Xavier, and that's Jack Nungy. I had mentioned him before as one of the big experienced guys on this team. Nungy I think he's a 5th-year senior. He was at Iowa, where he was a bench player, and since he's been at Xavier, this is now his 2nd season. He has been a star for them. He's up to averaging 17 and 7 rebounds this year so far for Xavier. And as a 7-footer who scores the ball, I imagine he is going to be a focal point for Duke on defense, whether it's Kyle Filipowski or Derek Lively or even Ryan Young, who has to guard this guy. He has moves, he can shoot it, and is probably unlike any player that Duke has seen so far this season.
Okay, so with that, let's get to Xavier's opponent, who might be Duke's next opponent, and that is the Florida Gators. Florida is number 36 in Ken Pom. I mentioned that Xavier's 33, Florida's 36. They are equally good on offense and defense. They're like a top 40 team at both those aspects of the ball. On offense, they do a really good job of holding on to the ball, not committing turnovers, and getting a good shot. They shoot the ball well from 3-point range and also from the free throw line. This is a team that are decent shooters. On defense, They are very good shot blockers, and they are excellent at defensive rebounding. 17th best defensive rebounding team in the country. As I've mentioned repeatedly on this broadcast in recent weeks and today, they are Duke is an outstanding offensive rebounding team. It is one of our biggest strengths. And in Florida, we're going to be facing a team that does not give up offensive rebounds. So let's get to the most interesting thing about Florida. We have teased this earlier. We've talked about this. Colin Castleton. I bet most of our viewers have not listeners, whatever the heck they are, people who are consuming this podcast. Most of them probably have not heard of Colin Castleton. Guess what, folks? You need to learn the name. He is probably the best player in the country you've never heard of. 5th-year senior who's averaging 25.5 points per game and 8.8 rebounds per game. And by the way, blocking 3.3 shots per game. But I'm getting into the players. Sam, that is your area. Tell me more about the truly impressive big man for the Florida Gators.
I suppose if you're a big college basketball fan, you may have heard of him because he is a 5th-year senior. This is not someone that came out of nowhere.
But like last year, he only averaged 16 points per game. You know, it's not like
only 16 points per game. Now he's up
that's
to
good. But I'm saying like he would not have been someone that you would have said, oh, this guy's in the SEC Player of the Year, National Player of the Year conversation this year.
And now he absolutely
is. Yes.
And he had been at Michigan for a couple of years before he transferred to Florida. So has been in big time college basketball for a long time. But you said you gave us the headline stats: 25 points and 8.8 rebounds a game. This is not a guy that you're ever going to lose track of. There are very few guys in D1, especially high level D1 basketball, that are averaging over 20 points a game. So incredible for him. He's not the best 3-point shooter. He's only started taking 3-pointers this year. And so I do wonder for Duke, given that so much of the offense runs through Castleton, I do wonder the extent to which Duke is going to try to push him out and make him uncomfortable. This is always the question when you play a team that has one truly elite guy, and they have some other very good players. Florida is not a bad team. You said that they're in the 30s in Ken Pom. They very much are going to make the NCAA tournament, potentially as an at-large bid, if not winning the SEC, although the SEC has so many good programs. But Florida is a very good team. All of that said, the offense entirely runs through Castleton. And so the question is, does Duke let Castleton get his points and try to stop everyone else, or do they really focus on him? I think given Duke's strengths on defense, especially given Duke's size on defense, that they should be able to push him around. They're not going to completely knock him over, but push him around and make him feel enough pressure that he's going to have to pass the ball out a little bit. He's going to have to, adjust his game to play against Duke's really tough, really strong, and really defensively minded front line.
Well, Colin Castleton is 6'11", 7 feet, and he's 240 pounds. That is
you can't knock him over. That's why I said,
yeah, that's gonna be a challenge. I bet Ryan Young, will be up to pushing him around some. But for Kyle,
Ryan Young's probably licking his chops for this potential matchup, right? Like he's excited on Friday to either get to face Jack Nungy or Colin Castleton, both of whom are like big, experienced dudes. So Ryan Young's like, these are my guys. Let me at them.
Yeah, although it's worth noting that my bet would be you will see mostly Lively and Filipowski playing against those guys. And I think Lively, especially with his defensive instincts and his ability with his length to bother guys, I think it's a fascinating matchup between him and Colin Castleton. All right, Sam, is that going to do it for us? We got anything else here, or we're excited for Thanksgiving, right?
The other couple of notes about this tournament. So Duke plays Thursday afternoon. So when you're depending on your family's traditions, you may be sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner at 3 p.m. Eastern when Duke is tipping off against Oregon State. So just be mindful of that. And if you think that the game on Thursday is too early for prime time, oh my God, the game on Friday, assuming that Duke beats Oregon State, is going to be so late. You might as well take a nap early in the day because depending on how long the first game goes, hopefully Oregon State versus the loser of Florida and Xavier, the Duke game is going to tip no earlier than 11:30 p.m. Eastern, which is a cool 8:30 on the West Coast. And if you're really into World Cup, you might just like nap all day. You might get up on Friday, do your shopping, come home, take like a 6-hour nap. This is all assuming that you're on the East Coast. uh, wake up for the Duke game, which is going to tip off like around midnight, and then stay up for one or two World Cup games just to really like totally ruin your weekend. Then Duke gets a break on Saturday, no matter what happens in these games. I think, Jason, the plan is that we're going to come back on Saturday to talk about
Yes.
what happened in those two games and then preview the game on Sunday. We're sort of hoping, at least I'm hoping, that Duke gets Gonzaga in that championship game. Purdue and West Virginia are also waiting on the other side of the bracket. So
Yeah,
that
two
game,
good teams. And Gonzaga has not looked like world beaters so far. So it could happen.
it could be. So that game would be Sunday afternoon. So that's just sort of the preview of your timing for the weekend. Obviously, Duke plays Wake Forest in football on Saturday. And then if you're also following the women's version of the Phil Knight Legacy bracket, Duke gets UConn in the afternoon on Friday. So if you do my nap thing, you can't watch the Duke UConn game. That's at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So it'll be about 6 p.m. So later afternoon on Friday. And then if Duke is able to beat UConn, which we would love to have that happen. If Duke is able to beat UConn, then they play in the championship game, which is like around midday on Sunday. If they lose, then the Duke women are going to play, I think, later in the day on Sunday. I think that's actually even Sunday night. So if you're trying to follow all of this weekend, you're not going to get any sleep, especially if you're watching World Cup.
UConn isn't even the best team in in that women's field, because Iowa's in that field, and I think they're considered better than UConn. It is a really impressive field that the Duke women will be wading into in that tournament. But I'm glad you reminded folks that come on Saturday, people. If you want to hear our recap of the first two games of the PK 85, we will do that on Saturday in advance of Duke's game on Sunday, which again we hope will be Gonzaga. We hope will be the championship game. That's certainly what we're pointing toward. All right, Sam, thanks for joining me. Everybody out there, thanks for listening. Don't forget to send us those emails at dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We haven't mentioned this in a while, but we still love it if you would go onto your app or whatever it is you use to consume podcasts and give us a nice review or rating, like us, subscribe, all that kind of jazz. These are things that matter, that help other Duke fans to find the DBR podcast, and they ensure that once you found it, you will never miss out on a single episode. Donald could not be with us because he's over in Gutter, but Sam and I will be here all weekend to give you all the latest. Till then, here's the Duke Band. Play us out and take us home. So remember, our goal, no mistakes.
Yes.
If you make an error, plow on through. Because you don't have a computer to edit, and I have limited time to edit before I get out of town, and Donald's in Doha. So
yep.
By the way, did you yeah, I'm sure you didn't, because it was the middle of the night for you. The Saudi Arabia, Argentina.
I didn't watch it. I
Wow.
woke up, it was already over. Yeah.
Wow.
I know. Crazy.
Yeah. I woke up just as it was ending. It was actually kind of funny. I at CNN International, there's certain stories that they tend to give to me more than others. Like I get all the space stories, I get all the sports stories, I get all the entertainment stories, and I typically get a lot of U.S. politics stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sat down at my computer to start work today, and I saw that the lead on the first show that I was writing on it said Saudi Arabia, and my initials were on it. I was like, oh, okay, so I wonder what I'm writing about Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I was writing about the World Cup. I was like, oh shit, Saudi Arabia won.
Not the Saudi Arabia topic that you usually expect.
No, it was not. But I'm the sports guy, so I got that story. It was like, wow. Yeah, it was a fun morning of working at CNN. Let me tell you.
I have one of my best friends from growing up. His parents are from Argentina. He is pissed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but you know what? They're not out. I mean, all they have to do is
No.
Mexico and Poland. They'll go through. So
right.
I mean, and that's not. They're good enough that they can do that.
Right.
Where's Donald when we need him?
I know.